I sat in my office, high above the city, watching the rain slide down the floor-to-ceiling windows like silver threads. The skyline glowed under the morning light, but my attention wasn't on the view. It was on the email open on my screen. Subject line: Request for funding. Immediate assistance needed. Sender: Michael Barnes. I hadn't seen that name in 7 years, but the moment I read it, my chest tightened. Michael Barnes, my old boss, the man who once stood in the middle of the office, waved my resume in front of the team and said, "This is what happens when you hire someone with a bargain bin degree." Back then, I'd laughed along, just to keep from crying in the bathroom stall. Today, though, I was sitting at a walnut desk worth more than my first year's salary. A fresh bouquet of white lilies perfumed the air, my silk blouse felt smooth against my skin, and my assistant had just set down a cappuccino with a tiny heart in the foam. I clicked the email open. His message was desperate. His company was drowning. He needed a major investor to keep the doors open. And the investor he was pitching to unknowingly was me. A quiet smile tugged at my lips. I leaned back in my chair, letting the leather cradle me. The universe had an interesting sense of humor. 7 years ago, I was 23 and fresh out of a small state college, clutching my marketing degree like it was my ticket to a better life. I had grown up in a town where most people stayed put, worked at the diner, married their high school sweethearts, and lived within 5 miles of their parents. I wanted more. I believed landing a job at a sleek downtown agency would be the start of everything. Michael Barnes was the agency's star account director, charismatic, well-dressed, and ruthless. He was also my direct boss. The day it happened is burned into my memory. It was a Monday morning meeting, the kind where everyone squeezed into the glass conference room with bad coffee and fake smiles. I had stayed up all night polishing a campaign proposal I was proud of, a bold, fresh idea that I believed could win us the client. I barely got 3 slides in before Michael interrupted with a smirk. "Cute," he said, flipping through my printed deck like it was a children's book. "But this is what happens when you hire someone with a discount degree from, what was it again? Eastfield State." Laughter rippled around the table. My face went hot. My hands were under the table, clenched so tightly my nails dug crescents into my palms. I forced a laugh, pretending it didn't sting, but my throat ached with swallowed humiliation. After the meeting, I locked myself in the bathroom, gripping the edge of the sink as tears blurred my reflection. I could still hear their chuckles echoing in my ears. That night, I called my mother. She listened quietly, then said, "Baby, people will always try to tell you what you're worth. Don't let them be right." The next day, I found a secondhand laptop sitting on my porch with a note taped to it. "For the business you haven't built yet." My mom had dipped into her savings to buy it. I quit that job a week later. Michael barely looked up when I handed in my resignation. "Good luck out there," he said casually, like I was disposable. But as I walked out of that office for the last time, laptop in my bag, I made myself a silent promise. I would build something so big, so unignorable, that one day the world and Michael Barnes would know my name. Walking away from that job was terrifying. I had no safety net other than the small savings I'd built, my mother's faith in me, and that secondhand laptop that still smelled faintly of cardboard and hope. The first few months were brutal. I worked 2 part-time jobs, one at a bookstore, one at a coffee shop, just to keep the lights on while I taught myself everything I could about entrepreneurship. I devoured podcasts, free online courses, and late-night YouTube tutorials about digital marketing. I built my first website on a free platform and pitched my services to anyone who would listen. Most people didn't. I still remember my first client, a local florist who couldn't afford a big agency. I offered to run her social media for almost nothing, just to prove myself. When her sales spiked that Valentine's Day, she cried and hugged me, and I went home and cried too, because for the first time, I believed I could actually do this. Eventually, I landed a mentor, Claire Monroe, a powerhouse marketing consultant who saw something in me when I nervously introduced myself at a networking event. She didn't care where I went to school. She cared about my work ethic and my ideas. Claire became the first person who truly believed I belonged in the room. She showed me how to pitch to bigger clients, how to price my services without apology, and how to think like a CEO. The years that followed were a blur of long nights, missed parties, and too much takeout. I worked from my tiny apartment, then a co-working space, slowly growing a reputation for results that spoke louder than any diploma ever could. With each client win, my confidence grew. I stopped hearing Michael's voice in my head, mocking my degree. Instead, I heard Claire's, "Keep going. They can't ignore you forever." By year 3, I had a small team. By year 5, we were running campaigns for national brands. I incorporated the business, bought my first office space, a small, sunlit suite with secondhand furniture, and celebrated by taking my mom out to dinner somewhere nice enough that we both laughed at the menu prices. Online, I stayed quiet. No flashy posts, no bragging about revenue or clients. I kept my head down, working, building, becoming the kind of woman who no longer needed validation from anyone, least of all Michael Barnes. And yet, every time I booted up that old laptop, still sitting on a shelf in my office, I'd run my fingers over the worn keys and whisper to myself, one day, I would have the chance to show the world, and him, just how wrong they were. When I agreed to meet Michael, I chose my company's downtown headquarters for the location, a glass and steel building with a lobby so polished you could see a reflection on the floor. I arrived early, as I always do, and straightened the cuff of my blazer while waiting in the private conference room. The room was filled with little details of my journey, framed campaign posters from our biggest wins, a shelf of marketing awards, and that old laptop sitting in a shadow box frame. It reminded me why I was here. The door opened. Michael stepped in, looking older than I remembered. His once perfectly styled hair was streaked with gray, and the confident swagger I used to hate was replaced with a nervous energy. He glanced around the room, his eyes catching on the awards, the view, the expensive rug under his shoes. "You must be Miss Bennett," he said, offering his hand. I shook it, keeping my face neutral. "That's right. Please sit." He did, fumbling with his briefcase before sliding a packet of papers across the table. "I'll be direct," he said. "Barnes & Company has been hit hard this past year. We've lost several major accounts, and we're on the brink of closing. But with the right investor," he hesitated, then gave me a hopeful look. "With your firm's backing, we could turn it around." I listened quietly, sipping my coffee, letting him talk. He explained projected revenues, market share, the potential for growth. I could hear the desperation under every polished sentence. When he finally finished, I set my cup down. "You know," I said, my tone calm but steady, "we've met before." He blinked, confused. "I'm sorry?" I leaned forward slightly. 7 years ago. Eastfield State graduate, junior account coordinator. You held my resume in a team meeting and called my degree a bargain bin education. His face went pale. He opened his mouth, closed it, then gave a weak chuckle. I was tough on everyone. You know how agency culture is." "No," I interrupted gently but firmly. "You weren't tough. You were cruel. And that day, you made me feel like I would never be enough." Silence stretched between us. "But here we are," I continued, gesturing around the room. "This company? The one you're pitching to? I built it from the ground up. And now, the woman you once humiliated controls whether yours survives." Michael's eyes darted around again, taking in the scale of what I had created. His jaw tightened. "You've done well for yourself," he said finally, voice low. "Yes," I said, sitting back. "I have." For a moment, I let him sit with that. The weight of it, the irony, the reversal of power. "You asked for funding," I said at last. "I'll consider it. But first, we're going to talk about what went wrong, not just in your business, but in how you treat people. If I invest in you, I'm not just saving a company. I'm demanding change." His lips pressed into a thin line. The man who once laughed at me now looked like someone being handed his last chance. And for the first time since I'd read his email, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not gloating, just closure. I let the silence hang for a moment longer before sliding his proposal packet back toward him. "If I choose to invest," I said, "it won't just be about money. It will be about culture. You build a company that burned through talent because you treated people like they were replaceable. That ends now. Michael's jaw tightened. You're saying you'll only help if I change how I run things? Yes, I said simply. Here's what I want. First, every employee on your payroll gets a fair wage, clear career paths, and a seat at the table when big decisions are made. No more public humiliations. No more fear-driven management. Second, I want you to hire a professional HR director, not just someone who pushes paperwork, but someone empowered to build a real people-first culture. Third, mentorship programs, especially for young women entering the industry. No one should feel what I felt sitting in your conference room 7 years ago. He was quiet, his eyes fixed on the table. And last, I added, softening just slightly, I want you to attend quarterly leadership coaching sessions. If I'm putting my name and money behind you, I need to know you're committed to becoming a better leader, not just saving face. He swallowed hard. Those are big asks. They're non-negotiable, I said, my tone calm but firm. If you want my backing, you accept all of them in writing. For a moment, I thought he might refuse. But then, his shoulders slumped, and the fight went out of his eyes. You've changed, he said quietly. I smiled just a little. I had to. We sat in silence, the city humming below us. Finally, he nodded. Fine. I'll agree to your terms. Good, I said, rising from my seat. My legal team will draft the paperwork. Once you sign, we move forward. As I walked him to the elevator, I felt no anger, no gloating satisfaction. Only a deep, grounding sense of rightness. This wasn't revenge. This was rewriting the ending for me, for every young woman who'd ever been laughed out of a room. When the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the glass. The girl who had once cried in a bathroom stall was gone. The woman staring back at me knew exactly who she was. 3 weeks later, the deal was signed. Michael kept his word. The first update I received from his company showed salary adjustments across the board, a new HR director hire, and a calendar full of leadership coaching sessions, all booked under his name. It was strange at first to watch from a distance. Part of me half expected him to back out, to prove my conditions were too much for his pride. But he didn't. If anything, he seemed lighter in the few follow-up meetings we had. One afternoon, as we were leaving a quarterly review, he lingered by the door. You know, he said, voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. You were right. About everything. I wish I'd treated you differently back then. I studied him for a moment, then nodded. I know. There was nothing else to say. Forgiveness didn't need to be dramatic. Sometimes it was just choosing not to carry the weight anymore. That night, I stayed late at the office, sitting with the city lights twinkling below. I pulled the framed shadow box off the shelf and opened it carefully. The old laptop was scratched and slow, but it still powered on. When the screen lit up, I ran my fingers over the keys and thought about the girl who once sat in a tiny apartment, terrified but determined. She had no idea what she was building, only that she couldn't go back. I smiled, tears stinging my eyes but not falling. Michael's company was turning around. My own was thriving. And somewhere deep inside, the girl I used to be was finally at peace. I shut the laptop and placed it back in the frame. Tomorrow there would be more meetings, more clients, more decisions. But tonight, I let myself simply feel proud. As I turned off the lights and stepped out of the office, I whispered into the empty hallway. Not out of spite, but out of gratitude. He once mocked my education. Now it funds his second chance.